All right, APUS, this is going to be our last lecture for Unit 6.1, which is on chapters 23 and 24. And really this whole unit, it's about the Gilded Age, 1860s up to around 1900, but the focus is on politics and economics. Just so you know kind of how your book organizes these chapters. The Gilded Age is covered in 4 chapters, 23, 4, 5, and 6. Chapter 23 is almost all about Gilded Age politics. 24, economics. Chapter 25, which is going to be in our next unit, is about social issues in the Gilded Age. And then chapter 26 is about the West and the settlement of the West during the late 1800s. So your book gives 4 chapters to this time period, kind of broken down by theme. You've watched some lectures last week on big business and the Gilded Age and labor unions, and most of that is all in chapter 24 in the economics. I did want to give you at least one lecture on Gilded Age politics. Those other lectures, I was able to kind of recycle or reuse some things I had already recorded, but this lecture is brand new just for you guys because Gilded Age politics is kind of boring and kind of obscure, and it's really hard to make it exciting. So, if you look at this sheet that I have on the screen, it's just a table, and I've kind of put a timeline on the left and some key terms on the right. And I'm going to try to help you understand these things and make it interesting. But just know, if you look at the themes there, Gilded Age politics are known for corruption, scandal, and class kind of warfare and differences. And that's just not always super exciting. The reason those scandals and the corruption could happen is because people didn't really pay attention to this stuff. Yet it does shape our country. When we call this the Gilded Age, and we talked at the beginning of how there's kind of a covering of gold, but then there's kind of a dirty underbelly. A lot of these scandals and the stuff in this political stuff is some of the dirty side of the Gilded Age. So just real quick, we'll look down the left side of the table. You'll see all the presidents from the late 1800s. We had a lot of them. We had some one-term presidents. We had an assassination. We actually had a couple of assassinations. And if you look at that list, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, you'll see they're mostly Republicans. Gilded Age politics was dominated by the Republican Party. It emerged during the Civil War or just before. And the Democrats were seen as the party of secession, of rebellion. Sometimes the Democrats were referred to as the party of rum, Rome, and rebellion. Rum meaning alcohol because of all the Irish immigrants and their tendency to drink. Rome because of Catholics and their affiliation with the Pope and Rome. And then rebellion because of secession and the Civil War. And so Republicans were able to use those accusations to kind of dominate this era. The Republican Party becomes a very pro-business party, and the Democratic Party, while kind of not in the spotlight, continued to be the party of the commoner and the populist movement, and they have a little bit of success, but not a lot. So how do you remember this? How do you learn these presidents? Sometimes they're called the forgettable presidents or the faceless presidents. Almost all of them have beards, which is rare for presidents. Most presidents don't have facial hair, but almost all of these presidents did have beards. So the bearded presidents or the forgettable or the faceless presidents. How do you remember them? I recommend coming up with an acronym. That's why I've kind of highlighted these first letters in each of their names: GHGA, G or HCHCM. There is an acronym on the internet you could find that finishes up with "Get Arrested, Call Home Crying Mother." But if you come up with something like that, that might be something to help you remember these names. I'll go through real quick each one, talk a little bit about their years and some of the key terms. Ulysses S. Grant, the commander from the Civil War, the Union Army, he becomes president, serves 2 terms. His presidency is known for scandal. Very good general at the end, but he did not surround himself with good people. The credit mobilier scandal was in the railroad industry. There was a whiskey scandal with one of his cabinet officials. Some relatives got Grant involved with a stock market kind of price of gold scandal, and of course all that Boss Tweed stuff. So I'm not going to ask you to know a ton about Grant, but you do need to know that his 8 years were noted for scandal, and it wasn't necessarily him that was corrupt, but the people that he surrounded himself with. Of course, that's also the period of Reconstruction, and Grant was, in general, a strong protector of Black rights, and he promoted the protections for the freedmen from the KKK and things like that. After Grant, we get Hayes, and we've talked a little bit about him. He comes to power through the Compromise of 1877. That was that deal that ended Reconstruction and pulled troops out of the South. Without troops in the South, the Redeemers or the Southern Democrats really took back control of most of the politics in the South at a state level. On a national stage, there was a strike. This came up a little bit in our labor unions lecture, but there was a railroad strike in 1877, and Hayes is noted for siding with business. He's a Republican, and they sent in the troops to kind of quell the strike and very kind of violently put the railroads back to work. After Hayes comes Garfield. Garfield is what is known as a dark horse candidate, meaning he had a little bit of fame from the Civil War and he had been in Congress, but he was not the projected winner for the presidency, but he emerged late in the race and he won the presidency, and he took up an issue that is known as civil service reform. Essentially what this means is he wanted to fix the spoils system, or what is sometimes referred to patronage. In our democracy, we elect leaders, but most government jobs are not elected, they are appointed. And when you win an election of power, you get to appoint people to those offices. And Andrew Jackson was famous, to the victor goes the spoils, or rotation in office, where he would appoint loyal supporters to government positions. This is one of the areas where there's corruption, and Garfield takes the noble position of, let's reform this. Let's not make civil service jobs the buddy system, but let's make those jobs be earned or at least tested on merit. As a result, he was unpopular within his own party. Several Republicans were upset that he was trying to reform this, and he was assassinated by a crazy office seeker named Charles Guiteau. He was shot in the back. He lingered for about 6 months, I believe, during the summer of 1881, and eventually bad medicine and really his own doctor killed Garfield from the bullet wound. But it was not immediate when he was shot. His successor is Chester Arthur, and he follows through on Garfield's plan to reform, and he signs the Pendleton Act. The Pendleton Act is the law that accomplishes civil service reform and says government jobs, at least in some degree, need to be based on merit. But Arthur is not popular either, and in 1884, the Republicans go a different direction, and in 1884, Democrat Grover Cleveland becomes the first Democrat to win the White House since the Civil War. Now, Cleveland, one advantage he has is he's a moderate Democrat and he's from New York. So he's not Southern, he's not associated with slavery or anything like that. So he's a very Republican-like Democrat. I put on here some of my favorite terms from this: stalwarts, half-breeds, and mugwumps. Yeah, it sounds like it's from a chapter of Harry Potter or something. Stalwarts were Republicans who liked the old spoil system method of giving jobs to your friends. Half-breeds were guys like Garfield, who were reformers, who they were Republicans, but they were willing to maybe do the right thing and reform the system. So everybody else in the Republican Party, the good old boys, the stalwarts, called them half-breeds. Mugwumps are Republicans who, in the election of 1884, because they were upset with the Republican Party, voted Democrat. Mugwumps were Republicans who voted Democrat. The idea is that I think your mug is on one side of the fence and your wump, which is your backside, is on the other side of the fence. So they were like fence sitters. And essentially, Cleveland wins the presidency because the Republican Party was splitting over this civil service issue, and mugwumps put him into the White House. There's some issues during Cleveland's presidency dealing with the budget and the tariff and Civil War pensions. I'm not going to go into that for the sake of time, but Cleveland does not get reelected in 1888. And in 1889, we get another Republican, Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison is very Republican. He's pro-business. He's high tariffs. One of the famous things during his presidency, when there's another massive strike, this time at Carnegie's plant, the Homestead Steel Strike, Harrison sends in the troops and crushes that labor movement. And so Harrison is a very pro-business Republican. By 1893, though, the economy is going to go into panic. And 1893 is the worst economic panic or depression prior to the Great Depression of the 1930s. Harrison is voted out, and Cleveland, the Democrat, for the first and only time in American history, is voted back in, the only president to serve two non-consecutive terms. Cleveland comes in and has to deal with the fallout from the panic. A crazy thing happens during these 4 years. Our government treasury, our gold reserves, and our economy is still backed by hard money. The treasury is so low that there is a fear that the government is going to have to shut down and not be able to conduct business and pay its obligations. J.P. Morgan, big business financier, and a team of Wall Street investors in 1893 bailed out the United States government. They pulled together their money, loaned it to the government for bonds, allowed the government to continue in operation, and over a decade later, Morgan and other Wall Street bankers get paid back plus interest. It's just crazy to think about. Nowadays, we're used to seeing our government bail out important industries when a recession hits, but in the 1890s, it was the opposite. It was the big businesses that were bailing out the government. It's a crazy development, and it's a product of all of that monopolizing and growth of industry and wealth that we talked about last week. Finally, the last president on here is William McKinley. He's also a Republican. He wins the White House in 1896. He will also win again in 1900, although he's assassinated in 1901. McKinley was a big business Republican president as well. He favored high tariffs. On a side note, he also favored imperialism and expansion. We'll talk about that in future chapters. But McKinley was rivaled by this point by a movement known as populism. Populism is a movement of the average American, the everyday working class. And at first, populism began in the 1890s as a third party. But by 1896, populist ideas and populist leadership, William Jennings Bryan, had been kind of absolved into the Democratic Party. And they made a real challenge for government reform, for regulation, for antitrust, to kind of pull back the power of railroads and banks. And it almost happened in 1896, but McKinley, with his huge financial reserves won the election, and reform of capitalism and big business is going to have to come at a later time in the 1900s. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Some of this stuff, especially towards the end, I think bleeds over into chapter 26. And I'm not always sure where the chapter kind of blends that line, but I just wanted to go through an overview of late 1800s politics for you guys. And then lastly, kind of explain the next couple days. On the 14th and 15th, Thursday and Friday, the school has set these days up as an exam schedule where we have an hour and a half exam period. Second period will be one day, fifth period will be the other day. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post your Unit 6.1 DBQ and your Unit 6.1 multiple choice test. I'm going to post those. They're going to be available for you to do on either day. You can do them in one sitting, an hour for the DBQ and 20 minutes or so for the multiple choice. It fits within your hour and a half class period. But if you aren't super stressed or overwhelmed by other exams, if you want to space them out and do one day and one the other day, you can do that. If you want to do one in the morning and one at night, you can do that. It will still be flexible to be done at your own schedule, but just know over the next 2 days, Thursday, Friday, the 14th and 15th, you'll need to do your DBQ essay on the Gilded Age and your Unit 6.1 multiple choice test. As always, jump on during office hours, send me an email, send me a Canvas message. I've been trying really hard to get back with you guys as soon as possible. All right. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. We'll be back in person at least a little bit, hopefully next week. See you.